Yeah, well, let's dig in. Hello, everybody. I'm David Cooks, and I tell you what, paralysis can take on many, many forms. It can be physical like mine, or it can be psychological.
You can do anything you put your mind to. What seems impossible can be done by you.
And what we try to do is feature stories that go from difficult places to fulfilling purpose.
It may knock you down, but don't let it stop you. Got so much to give, a lot of life to live. You must go from paralysis to purpose.
You're in for a treat today.
Yeah, paralysis to purpose. Oh, paralysis to purpose.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Paralysis to Purpose, the podcast. I'm your host, David Cooks, and before we get the show started, let me just thank you in advance for subscribing to our YouTube channel, leaving some great reviews, and also hitting that like button and that share button. It helps spread the word about our podcast. I say this every week, and it never gets old. I get to interview some of the most intriguing and inspiring people on the planet. And today is no exception. I did my research, and during the research, I was so moved by everything that I saw and read. His accomplishments are amazing, and we're going to get to talk about those. But it was his depth of faith that really challenged me more than anything else. I was inspired by his story. I was inspired by all the things he accomplished, but I was really challenged. Like, this guy really, he doesn't just believe in God. He knows God. He's an actor. He's a musician. He's a voice talent. He's a playwright. He's a husband. Yeah, he's a quadriplegic. And he just changes lives wherever he goes. The only thing I didn't see was author. We've been graced on Paralysis to Purpose to interview some great people, many who are well known, and many who aren't, but all whose stories are great. So without further ado, Vincent Rutley, all the way from the sunny state of Arizona. He used to be a Midwesterner like us, but he's warm now. So, welcome to the podcast, man.
God bless you, bro. Thank you for having me, man. I'm excited to get on with you.
I've been in a wheelchair 44 years, and I still have to tell my story. And there was a while I was like, why do I need to keep telling people this? Well, because everybody's story is the most important thing they have. Without a story, where do you go? It was 12 years ago, I think, November 2nd, right, of 2011, where you had a horrific car accident that, as you said, began your next assignment. Take us back to that and just share a little bit about that day.
Well, first of all, man, I just want to thank you so much. That was a great intro. That introduction, I don't think I ever had an introduction like that, but that introduction got to pray for humility. Thank you. Gotta keep me humble, Lord. But God has been so good these past 12 years. As you know, we never expect what happened, but it could have happened to anybody. At that time, I was doing stand-up comedy. I was getting ready to go on my first stage play tour. I was engaged for 3 weeks. And November the 2nd was just a regular day for me. I went to work, got off, wanted to get something to eat or whatnot. My baby brother called me and was like, hey, man, I need you to come give me a battery jump. The battery's still draining on the Jeep. And I'm like, okay. This was out in Pontiac, Michigan, not far from Detroit, I-75. As you can imagine, the traffic was going about 80, 85. And I get out there, I park behind them, and I'm like, all right, well, look, man, in order for me to face you, to jump it, I got to face the hoods. So when the traffic clears, I'm going to pull my truck out into the highway, which was the only way that I could, get it jumped. I was like, I'm going to pull out on the highway, I'm going to turn, and then that way I can go out to the farthest lane, I can face you on the side, we'll jump you, we'll both make sure traffic clear, we'll both pull out. I'll get back in the truck, and I don't put my seatbelt back on, because this is a quick little maneuver, man. And he's standing out there, and it's funny, because I had something in the back of the truck. that was blocking my view. So I could turn around and look, but I still couldn't see traffic. I think I had a stove or something there. I worked for Habitat for Humanity at the time, and we were able to kind of like junk the bad stuff. And I said, oh, I'm gonna junk that in the morning. This is the crazy thing about it. I had plans for the next day. And that's the amazing thing about God is he'll interrupt your plans for his will to be done. And got back in the truck. I waited for baby bro. And if you can imagine, he's standing outside. So he's not in the car. He's standing right on the side of the highway. And he's like, it's clear. Go ahead. I pull out to the fast lane, which is the furthest way over. And this truck came off the exit. It was an exit right next to where we were. And he didn't see it coming. And I clearly couldn't see it coming. And he's standing outside. And it's crazy because the more I tell the story, the more my heart goes out for what he had to witness. And it wasn't a movie to him. This is like a movie, but he's standing right there. And as soon as I make my quick turn, I must have turned at the perfect time for that truck not to be able to avoid me. And they T-boned me right in the middle of the pickup truck. My body flew from the driver's seat to the passenger side. I busted my head wide open on the windshield. And my neck snapped. C4. So, pretty high up. And the blessing is I didn't see it coming. I didn't hear the car coming. I didn't see the lights. So I have no recollection of that moment. But my brother did tell me, he stood there on the side of the highway and watched the whole thing happen. The glass is shattering and my truck basically flew to the side of the highway. He ran over to me, opened the door, and I fell out on him. And at first, he didn't know what the damage was. He didn't even know that my head was busted open until he heard the blood hitting the grass. That's how drastic it was. And when he heard it, then he looked up and God put a nurse on the scene. I didn't know this until a while later, but a nurse jumped out her car. She saw the whole thing happen. She ran to my truck and she began to aid. So she said, we got to close it and we got to wrap it. So she just, was there just for that small amount of time to aid and help assist in that area. Or I could have bled out. They thought I had brain damage. Even though it was labeled as my fault because nobody's supposed to make a turn like that in the middle of the highway, they didn't press charges because they didn't know if I was going to make it or not. It was that serious.
Before you continue with the story, you talked about something that I think people don't realize is that it's not just the person who experiences the injury that's impacted. It's your entire family. And your brother had to deal with the trauma of the event just like you.
I'm glad you brought that up, Brother Dave, because a lot of quadriplegic that I've talked to or that I've met often have that feeling of they don't know what I'm going through. It's just me going through and we might be going through the physical side, but the emotional trauma happens to everybody. And for him to be standing out there, I truly believe in that moment, God knew that when my assignment kicked in, that I would be stronger in the chair than I would be watching it happen to him. It's almost like God is just like, this is going to be the biggest challenge you ever faced in your life. But you'll be more valuable to me going through the physical part than you would be watching your brother and still finding the strength to go on and encourage him. That would have hurt me bad, man. This is my baby brother. So I've always been super protective of him. We're about 4 years apart. And even though that's not that far, this is my little guy. Everywhere I went, we were together. And normally we're in the car together. Just so happened that God allowed me to be by myself that night. It wasn't meant for him to go through this part of the assignment. But having a family of faith, that is what gave me the strength in the beginning. Because as years go on, you gotta find ways to get back to staying consistent with that faith. It's easy to have faith in the beginning of a challenge because you're not expecting it to go for 12 years. And I told myself when I woke up in the hospital, I said, man, I'll be in here a couple of days, couple of weeks. I'll be out of here. I'll be walking. I'm about to be a testimony for Jesus Christ right now. And it was easy for me to lay there in that bed and say, Lord, no matter how long it takes, I'm going to serve you. No matter how long it takes, I'm going to bless you. Not knowing that it was going to be 12 years. And I still got to say that same prayer and mean it. God remembers what we say in our good days. And we got to remember what we say. And we can't just remember what God promised. We have to remember what we promised him.
Man, that's powerful.
So,
it's interesting also that it's important for our listeners to understand, and I share this also. I didn't know 2 years after giving my life to Christ as a 13-year-old that I would have a blood vessel erupt on my spinal cord. I didn't anticipate that, didn't see it coming, had a clean bill of health the week before from a doctor. And it was faith that I had going into it that allowed for me to have hope coming out of it. And
absolutely,
you talked about that. I think in one of the things that I saw about you, how you're grateful that you knew God going in and didn't have to try to find him in the midst of all the chaos and things that were going on. So you get to the hospital, you wake up a couple of days later. Walk us through that experience, because that was the beginning of your understanding your next assignment.
Yeah. So my family told me that I was talking that night. I don't remember any of that. I'm a silly guy. I do stand-up comedy for a living. That's one of the things I do sit-down comedy now, but that's one of the things that I do. So, they said I was in there cracking jokes. God just allowed my personality to come out, which gave them peace. It gave them peace to know that it wasn't brain damage, that, the nurses and the doctors are like, he's silly. He might have brain damage. My family said, no, that ain't brain damage. That's Vince. We thank God for personality. We thank God for being able to laugh in the midst of it. But at least 2 days later is when I was able to come to, and I was able to comprehend. They had me on some heavy medications, pain meds. Obviously, it wasn't brain damage, but it was a very bad concussion. So waking up, the room is spinning. And before I could speak to anyone, before I could open my eyes all the way, because I can hear the voices talking, and the first voice that I communicated with was a voice of God. He said, don't panic. I will heal you. This is before I knew I was in the hospital. This is before I knew I was in a car accident. I'm just laying in the bed, just kind of like, well, what's going on? And I hear the hospital background noise and doctors and nurses and families in the room. And one thing about my family that I absolutely love, we grew up, my brother has a new brand called Gospel Music Raised Me. And it's a t-shirt, it's a sweater. I'm gonna share it with you. I think you will love it. And the truth about it is we grew up in worship. We grew up in praise. I'm from Detroit. So Winans, Clark Sisters, Jay Moss. I mean, it's some amazing artists back there. Fred Hammond. Worship was in our house. And people don't understand the power of music. There was worship music playing while I was laying there asleep. So I'm surrounded by my family praying. I got worship music playing in the room. It's the atmosphere is set for God to come in and give me that confirmation. So when I wake up, my confidence is whatever's going on, I'm good. And I have my baby brother on the right side of the bed. I had my fiance on the left. And they told me what happened. And things started coming back to my remembrance. Like, oh, okay, yeah, we were out on the highway. And my brother told me what happened. And tears just filled my eyes, not because of what the doctor said, but because I'm still here. The Lord gave me his promise. And if God promised you something, man, no matter what it feels like, no matter what it looks like, no matter how long it takes, God don't renege. I thought that the healing was going to happen soon. So I was confident.
We have listeners here who don't believe in God. When you talk about hearing from God, how does that happen? What does that mean? What was it that gave you the reassurance that you knew that God was speaking to you in that dark moment?
Before the accident, I had been in a church my whole life, but I wasn't what I would consider a mature Christian my whole life. Probably a couple of years before the accident happened is when I really started to get deeper in my personal relationship. So my father is a bishop and he was my leader. He's my father and my spiritual covering at the same time.
Mhm.
So for years, I would wait for my father to speak what God told him concerning me in order to receive a word from God. And as a younger believer, that was my understanding on how I was going to get what I needed to get. But when I got older, I said, wait, if God could speak to my father, what makes me feel like God can't speak to me? So that's when I started to get serious about my relationship and not just allow my father to be the middleman between me and God. I had to gain a relationship with God for myself. And it was the relationship that gave me the understanding of what he sounded like. If that makes any sense. God can speak, God can give you a feeling, God can give you a confirmation through somebody else's words. And I had experienced all of those things up until that point. And at the end of the day, it's about relationship. Relationships are not made off of one person talking all the time. If one person talks all the time, after a while, there's a disbalance, and that's not a real relationship. I couldn't imagine if my wife did all the talking and I never talked back. And in my relationship with God, I understood the same way. And I had to learn how to talk to him more than I did all the other things that I love. And he started to guide me in my careers, my relationship. God confirmed to me that my wife was my wife before the accident. And that was probably one of the clearest times he had spoken to me. We met in August, got engaged in October. The accident happened in November. We got married in December. We never would have got married if I didn't hear the voice of the Lord tell me that's who that was to me. So I had to trust in his word more than what the doctor said, even though they had been doing this for years. And there's so many things that they told me, Brother David, over the years that God reversed. They told me that if I don't get feeling within year one, it'll never happen. My feeling didn't kick in until about year 4.5. So I'm about 3.5 years later than what they've seen. But because I depend on the God that gave me the promise and the God that created me more than the doctors that had the experience, I can trust and believe in that. And since that day, his word, him speaking to me has begun to go clearer and stronger and better through his word, through time of worship, through time of prayer and fast. And that's a deeper conversation for another time.
I want to talk about your wife in a moment, but I also want to touch upon the fact that the things that you're doing now were the things that were in you before you had the accident. When I speak and talk to groups, I often tell them that the gifts and talents that I was given didn't become paralyzed when I did. They're still there, and they're still there to be used. Can you talk about that with yourself? I mean, you were directing plays and acting and doing these things, and it sounds like an easy transition to go from where you were to where you are now, but it's not that easy. But it's still a transition you must make. Can you talk about the importance of following your purpose and your passions?
I knew my purpose well before the accident came. And you said it. I couldn't have said it any better. The accident didn't change my purpose. It didn't change who I was. It added an assignment to my purpose, but it didn't change who I was. It didn't change what I love to do. It didn't change what I enjoy doing. And because God allowed me to still have my own thought process, I had to just find out how to do it from the chair. God told my wife in her prayer after the accident happened, I'm going to take him places in his chair that I could not take him on his feet. It's promises like that that allows you to move in peace and move in purpose. Taking me places in my chair that I couldn't go on my feet, and he's done that. I mean, the platforms, the relationships, the transition was not easy. As a writer, I thought all I was going to do was just write stage plays until I got up. Can you imagine if I would have went off my own understanding? I never would have returned back to the stage. I never would have turned back to music. I never would have turned back to writing, directing, now filmmaking and acting and film. I never would have returned back to these things if I would have waited for the manifestation of the healing. God said, I will use you exactly where you are.
Now, hold on a second there, because what you just said is very powerful. If you're waiting for something else to get you moving, then you will never move because it's never perfect. And this is for anyone listening, whether you're in a wheelchair, whether you're walking, whether you're single, whether you're married, whether you're divorced, if you're waiting for everything to be just perfect,
come on,
that's not going to happen. That's interesting because you couldn't see yourself there yet. You still could write plays and you still were enthusiastic about all the production aspect of it. But I'm in a wheelchair now. I mean, can I really do this?
And I was active, bro. When my comedy, I was a physical guy. I wasn't the guy that just stood there and told jokes and waited for the punchline. I'm dancing, I'm moving. So not to have my body was supposed to be one of my greatest challenges, but it wasn't.
What was the mental shift that took place for you? Because for some people, they can't get past their difficulty, their challenge. When did you just say, you know what? This is who I am and this is what I do?
Day one. I had time to figure out how to do it, how to get it done, how to make the adjustments, but I had no time trying to figure out what kind of believer I was going to be. I had to figure out from day one, are you going to be that guy that read about God, that sang about God, that cried out to him, that heard his voice, and then as soon as tragedy strike, now you don't believe him anymore? Are you going to be the guy that trusts and believe in him to do the same thing for you? And I said immediately, I'm not going to be the guy that's going to fall to the wayside because life dealt me something different or my assignment changed. From day one, I had to figure out, I'm going to trust. Mm-hmm. I'm going to believe. I'm going to move. Because here's the thing, David, there was nothing that I can do to change it. There was nothing I could do to speed it up. It wasn't my decision to be in the chair. So I said, well, Lord, the things that I can't control, I believe that you will take that and you will give me grace. You will control that. The things that I can control, give me wisdom and discernment on what to do and how. I had to say, Lord, give me humility. These people got to change me every day. People got to wash me up. These people got to clothe me. These people got to feed me. I didn't have the strength to lift up a spoon in my mouth. I said, give me the humility to go through this as long as I have to, but as long as you get the glory. And I just said, if this is my new assignment, then I want to endure as a good soldier.
The acceptance of your assignment did not negate the reality of your daily experience.
Absolutely.
You talked about that. Your faith allowed to help you to get through that, but you had to deal with the changes. You had to deal with, for people who haven't had a spinal cord injury,
right?
Everything changes. Everything from A to Z. And you will be humbled in these situations. Let's talk about your wife. From the beginning, she made statements about being your wife and making sure you were cared for properly. That's a lot for young people to say something like that, not knowing what you're about to get into, not knowing the depth of the need for service and assistance. How important has that been for you and continues to be for you?
Words can't describe how special she is. She's everything I prayed for, desired, and more. There are things in my wife that I didn't know I needed, but God did. He gave me more than what I asked for. The one thing I did not worry about was if she was going to stay or not. That was the one fear that I did not have. I had more of a fear of how I was going to provide for her than I had if she was going to stay or not. One thing that God didn't allow my mind to go, is she going to leave? It's so important to seek God about the one. I was the kind of guy where I had girlfriends. I never cheated, but I couldn't be alone. I just always had to have somebody. And as soon as I stopped picking, because what I was doing was I would pick a young lady, I would date her, I would fall in love, head over here is in love, and then I would say, okay, Lord, what do you think about her? Is she a good fit for me?
You would do it after the fact.
we're talking about marriage, man. We're talking about where we're going to live, how many kids we're going to have, how we're going to organize. And she, just all these things. And I hadn't even acknowledged God about it yet. And that was my pattern. Thank God I realized that in that season. And I told the Lord, I said, I am not picking anymore. I said, the next pick, Lord, is going to be yours. And the way he did it, man, there's a whole movie that has to be made of how it happened. But just to make it short and sweet, we believed the same. We both were taught the same upbringing. And we had same views on how we wanted to raise our children and how we wanted to go about living. We had the same views on music and activity. We were so compatible that when God said, she's your wife, he's your husband, immediately we were preparing for the wedding. Just so happened that the accident happened along the way. So when the accident happened, we were so in tune with one another and we were so in oneness, and God was the center of our relationship before we said I do. It made all the difference in the world. We were locked in spiritually. I had never had a relationship where I had a physical connection, a natural friendship, and a spiritual connection. That was the first. And because of that spiritual connection, God was able to speak to me and speak to her separately about the same things. So she got her words and her promises, and I got mine, and they just so happened to be in line with each other because we were already working and operating spiritually as a marital couple.
Let's talk about a couple of things here, because you talked about initially you had some concerns after the accident about, can I provide? Can I do this? Can I do that? For those who are listening who have gone through difficult times and don't think that can be loved again, they don't think that they can be used by God because they feel like they're damaged goods. What do you say to that person that really is struggling with feeling worthy of love?
If anything that you hear, that you sense is telling you don't deserve it, is not the Lord. There is no future without faith, without believing, without trusting that you are who God says you are. I had to get to the point to where any negative thoughts, immediately I will cast them down. This is a lifestyle that I'm living. You have to understand that it's more than, oh, just go read your Bible, you'll be okay. No, it's more than that. Like, you have to literally practice reversing those thoughts. You have to make sure that you don't allow I call them spiritual curses, that you don't allow the spiritual curses to dictate to you who you are. Look at me. Just take a minute. If they're thinking, if they're the kind of people that's saying, well, you don't know what I've been through, Vince, take a hot second. Take a hot second and look at my situation. Look at David's situation and look at how unfavorable and how difficult this lifestyle could be. Yet, God is still giving me everything that I desired. Everything that I desired, I'm still able to have it, even though the wheelchair is my current assignment. It actually worked out as a blessing in God's hand if we allow him to have it. I had a statement that I said in the earlier days of the accident. I said, the Lord turned my farewell into a get well. You're talking to a man that could have been dead 12 years ago. You're hearing from a man who just November the 2nd was my anniversary of the accident. I'm still here to tell my own story. And that's why when God gives me opportunities to share the testimony, there is not a thought. I can go and speak for myself? You talking about a man that could have been dead? Come on, man. I got life, health, and strength, activity in my limbs. I can think for myself. I got a beautiful, beautiful wife. Gorgeous. I'm talking about caramel delight. Glory to him. Man, it's the peace of God.
It's clear that you are rooted in God and in faith. It's a lifestyle for you. It's not a crutch for you. It's a lifestyle. You were this way before, and and this is who you are now. You mentioned about you really weren't, according to the doctor, supposed to be able to do anything. I mean, your head was split open. You'd be a vegetable. You never do this. You never do that. But you kept moving forward. I want you to talk to our audience a little bit about the importance of resiliency, and then also about how your purpose is tied into serving others.
Yeah, that's beautiful. You brought up a good note. So right before I get to that answer, if I can, the doctors, when they came in and said that, okay, well, they first of all said that there was no way they could do surgery because the damage was done and it was severe. It was so bad that if they went in, that they would have destroyed more. 2 days later, 48 hours later, they came back and said, okay, we've done a little bit more research. Not only will we do the surgery, but we actually have a special way that we don't normally do it that will help Vince be able to turn his neck and move. Because the surgery that they had was going to be just to fuse the spine together, but it was going to be stiff, which was going to make me be in the power chair with the head rest, and maybe I can use the mouth thing to control my seat and things like that. But God gave them strategy on my behalf. The same doctor that said we can't do surgery at all, he came back and said, not only will we do surgery, but we're going to do a special surgery that's going to allow him to have more movement than intended. And that's just a reminder that just because we get bad news don't mean that it's end all be all. And I know I'm not the only one that had that experience. And it's happened so many times to the point where now when I get bad news, I just sit back and say, okay, let me not react. Because I've reacted so many times and I felt ashamed for reacting that way instead of having faith and trusting that God can still do something different than what I see and what I hear. They still said I was going to be a vegetable, but that I would have a little bit more head movement with it. How important was the resilience to carry that so that it can be a blessing to other people? Around year, I want to say 5.5, 6 of being in a wheelchair, I had a moment with the Lord. I like to call it real moments. Because to be honest with you, all the way up until that point, the resilience was more for just fighting to get stronger for my wife, fighting to get stronger for the kids that I desired, and also sharing that version of the testimony with those who heard it so that it can be a blessing, a representation of what real enduring would look like. But around year 5.5, I asked the Lord, I said, Lord, I still believe you're going to do it. I still trust in your promise, but why does it have to take so long? Because remember, in the beginning, I said, I don't care how long it takes. But you get to year 6, it's like, hold on now.
You get to day 12.
Lord, are you taking what I said for granted? But year 6, I asked that question, and you know what he told me, bro? And I shared this on the Elevate Testimonies a couple of months ago. He said, I need more eyes on the situation that I'm developing so that when I raise you up, everybody that was witnesses would know that it was nobody but me. That was year 5.5, 6. That humbled me so much. That reminded me that this has nothing to do with you, dude. Not only is it not your fault, not your punishment, but it's your assignment, but also it's your assignment to hold on to the promise and remain steadfast, because there are people in year 10 that's waiting to hear your testimony. And obviously, there are people in year 12. See, I've been telling it for 12 years. You said the same thing. We've been telling the testimony for years. But every time there's a new season or a new shift, those are new ears. Those are fresh eyes. Those are people that hadn't heard it before. It might be people back home in Michigan that was there in that season. That's like, okay, well, Lord, we still believing. But there are people in Arizona now. There's people on this podcast now. There are people in other countries. We just had somebody come on the Instagram Live in other countries that's like, hey, we're new to this testimony. But guess what? We needed to see it. This is the part that got me. The Lord said, Vince, I trust you enough to go through this as long as we need to, so that I can get all the glory. Not Vince get all the glory. Not Vince get famous or Vince's name get known. Your assignment is to be humble and remain steadfast and share this story as often as you need to, so that more people can see you in this position and recognize and realize that you serve God, just so that all eyes will go back to him instead of me.
So often we think it is about us. And
of course,
we think it's about us because we're having to deal with all the stuff that we can see. So it's not necessarily a negative thing. It's just like you think that there's something in this for me. It's got to be something in this for me. And there is. But the purpose that you have is always greater than you. And there's always somebody assigned to you that you don't even know about, that if you don't fulfill that purpose, the need that they have will go unmet and they won't fulfill their purpose. And so you have to always remember it's bigger than you. It's not about you. It involves you, but it's really not about you. You mentioned how you realized that this wasn't a punishment. Why is it that people go right there, right away, with anything that happens in life that is difficult, unexpected, traumatic, and we begin to think, did I do something wrong? Am I being punished?
I think it comes from guilt. I think it comes from guilt of knowing that we haven't always lived up to our expectations of what God has planned for us. I haven't been doing my part. I haven't been taking care of people. And it's a gut check, because we could do that before tragedy.
So the message for our listener is, it's not always because of something that you didn't do or that you did wrong.
Absolutely not.
As soon as you learn to release that and find the lesson, find the assignment, find the path you're supposed to take, and release the thing about, what did I do to get this? That's part of the mourning process.
Absolutely.
You're actually mourning loss. You may not identify it as such at the time, but all those questions and that guilt, that all those things happen during loss. And so I want our listeners to be encouraged that you may have been dealt something that you don't understand, that came out of left field, and you're sitting there trying to put yourself in the equation of the trauma. And you're actually outside of that trauma equation.
Absolutely.
And that you can still move forward and live. And look, there's nothing wrong with asking those questions. There's nothing, I tell people this all the time. I ask God a lot of questions, a lot of them, because we're in a relationship. And so if there's something I don't understand or that's confusing, it doesn't scare God, and see how it is that you can live a life that is purposeful and can benefit someone else. Because the moment you spend a little less time on your trouble and focus on somebody else's, you'll be amazed at the benefit that comes to you.
I'm still here. You're still here. Like, there's purpose. If I'm here for a reason.
As long as there's still time on the clock, you got a game to play.
Come on.
And you've got to engage in the game. I think what happens with so many people, Vincent, is that they remove themselves from the game. It was like you were going to remove yourself from the stage, but still kind of be a spectator.
Yeah.
And not be all in. And that wasn't going to work. You got to throw yourself all into whatever it is that you are called to do and make that work.
That's so good.
We really haven't talked about the work that you do. We spent a lot of time on your faith so far, which is great. But I want to talk about some of the plays you've done, some of the music you've done. I love the story about how you got back on the keyboard with 2 working fingers.
Yeah.
And you took the 2 that you had. You didn't worry about what you didn't have. You had 2 fingers that worked enough for you to create music and found yourself creating the music that would be used for movies and everything else.
Wow, the keyboard thing, man. Nothing after the accident just happened because I desired it to happen. I feel like the more I said yes and the more I surrendered this life to God and said, God, if I'm going to be here, I want you to do with this whatever you want to do with it. And when it came to the moment of getting back to the keys, I was the minister of music at the church before the accident happened. And we had a few musicians that came in and helped, and a couple of guys, they were really gifted and really talented. But nobody really sat to take on that title and that position as minister of music. With me getting back to church, because I think I went about a year without even going to church just to build my strength. Didn't even have the strength to get up and go out and be in the public. And when I finally got back to church, I saw the music being played and the singers singing and things like that. In the beginning, it wasn't about playing again. It was about just being an extra pair of eyes and ears. So I'll go to the rehearsals and help fix some of the sopranos and altos and get some of the notes right. I honestly don't even remember how it happened. I don't know if it started at home or at the church, where I would kind of just get back on the keyboard and I would turn on the strings. And with strings, the sound, you can hold on to note, and when you let it go, it just keeps flowing for a second. So with strings, I didn't have to worry about a footrest or a sustain pedal is what they call it for your foot, because I didn't have movement on my feet. This thumb did the bass notes on the left side of the keyboard, and this finger did the melodies on the right side. Doing the melodies up here, I'm doing the bass with this. Or if I had a bass player, I could take this finger and this thumb and do notes closer to one another for harmony's sake. And it was all about just the melody. It was no longer about chops, because I'm like, I don't have all these fingers. So I used what I had. And at that time, I had the musicians still with me. And while I returned back to the keys, it was fun because I got another keyboard player with me. So I'm not doing all the work. I was just doing special sounds. I was doing the strings and synthesizers and horns and trumpets. And sometimes I do the bass line. But when that keyboard player felt the transition out of the church, it left me in a position as a keyboard player by myself again. And instead of me panicking, same question. And this question goes into everything I do. Lord, show me how to do this in this state so that you can get the glory. And he showed me how to play without any hand grip, without any hand function, but just putting my fingers in the right position. And he just showed me different sounds, and I would mix the keyboard, man. And people thought I had all 10 fingers. Like, I would play and people would come up to me and be like, man, you sound amazing. You sound good. And what you doing? Teach me how to play. I'm just grateful that putting myself in that position and say, yes, Lord, that's all he needs is a yes. You don't have to have the plan. You don't have to have the formula. You don't have to have the next steps. You don't have to have a whole dialogue and a written out, structure. If you say yes, he'll give that to you. Sometimes he's waiting for you to say yes before he gives you the plan, because he doesn't want you to do the plan on your own or do it your way. You say yes, and then you trust him in that yes. And he just ordered my steps, man. And it was just a beautiful thing, brother.
A couple of things I wrote down while you were talking about that. The importance of community. Community is very important. To have a sense of belonging, a place that you could go to and feel included and welcome and a part of it. And for you, that church was that place after a year where you could not go just because physically you could not make that happen. And for our listeners, he was never supposed to be able to move his arms. The miraculous progress that he continues to make 12 years in is nothing short of miraculous. You have developed a great deal, I would say, of empathy and sympathy for others now that you've had this situation that you've been in.
Absolutely.
It manifested itself in a movie that you did about a homeless person. Can you talk about how that empathy and compassion and sympathy has grown in you over these last 12 years?
Oh my goodness, absolutely. Before the accident, I had never been through anything, if that makes any sense. I had never broken a bone. I had never really been to the hospital for anything serious. I had never really seen tragedy personally. So when the accident happened, it just changed the way I looked at people's personal lives and situations. Cause it's like, I'm going through this, but for all these years, I might be going through something that we can see, but how many people that I know were going through up here? We're going through in here. And it just changed my perspective on how to love on people and how to tell their stories. I love true stories. It's something about a true story that makes me excited. You get to hear it directly from the person that went through it themselves. Believe it or not, Street Corner. I wrote Street Corner in 2013, which was 2 years after the accident. I wrote it on my iPhone using my thumbs. At this time, I'm obviously I don't have the hand function, but I wrote Street Corner on my iPhone, finished the whole full script. I mean, it's probably like 90 pages, copied and pasted, placed it inside of a Word document, and then I formatted it from there. So people that had their full scripts in their hands didn't know that was written from a quadriplegic that used 2 thumbs on an iPhone. Glory to God, man. He will show you what to do with what you have. He will show you what to do with what you have. Whatever you have in your hands, God will give you the strength and the wherewithal to do it. Wrote Street Corner and I casted it. By that time, I had done so many stage plays in Detroit. This was my first time back to producing and directing and writing since the accident. Street Corner is about an old man that lives on the street corner, and he ends up running to 3 strangers. And it's amazing what you can get off the story of somebody else. His story was so full, he told 3 different parts of his story to these 3 different strangers, because he told the part that it was a more connected to them, and changed their lives. I wrote all the songs. Just a beautiful musical. It's actually 10 years of that production will be 2024. I'm going to release it on YouTube for free.
Wow. I want the listeners to understand everything you just said. You wrote the songs, you wrote the script, you got the cast, you did all of that 2 years after you're supposed to be dead and gone, a vegetable that can do nothing. And you took what you had. Here's the message to the listeners out here. Whether you believe in God or not, you need to hear this. It is a law. If you use what you have, it will get you further than thinking about what you don't have. Take the things that you have, use them to the best of your ability, ask questions, ask for help. Vincent asked God, he said, look, I'm in your hands and I need to know how to do this, because you obviously put this desire in me. And so you must want this to work.
Yeah.
That's what he did. That's the example. If you need to go and ask your friend or a doctor or someone, just anyone, it's the classic Moses question. God said to Moses, what's in your hand? And then he gave him instructions on what to do with that. You wrote a song, Miracle. Is that the title of it?
Yeah, that was one. I had 2 singles. That was one of the singles.
If you get a chance, listen to Miracle. His giftings and talents are and I know they're God-given.
Thank you.
They are so numerous. First time I talked to him, this is my second or third time, I was like, you doing what? And you do what? It just blows my mind. And I'm just so excited to see somebody out there making it happen. In spite of all the things that are going on, you're still making it happen. Now, before we go, I always ask our guests what comes to mind when they hear these 3 words. Okay, so I'm going to give you 1 word at a time, and then I want you to tell me what comes to mind. The first word is perspective.
Perspective is everything. It's always an angle. You have 100 perspectives on the same situation. And if your perspective comes from a place of peace if your perspective comes from a place that's led by God, you will find joy in every season. You will find joy in every circumstance. But my perspective is always God-driven.
Your perspective of God drives how you see him and what you receive from him. So if you don't believe God loves you, if you don't believe God is good and has good things for you, then your perspective, okay, how you see a thing determines how you attack it. And so if you don't see it right, if you don't see that there's good for you and there's love for you and there's compassion for you, then you're going to respond to the opposite of that. And I think that's what Vincent is saying. Perseverance.
Perseverance. Wow. The thing that comes to mind when I hear perseverance, patience. Patience, being able to go through what you're going through, being able to face the trials, the tribulations, and know that not only do you not have control over what comes next, but you do have control on how you respond to it. You do have control on what's in your hands. I feel like perseverance is led by just knowing what we have in our hands and using it to the best of our situation instead of just not doing anything at all. And it was close to what I wanted, what I thought I was going to do. I said, when I get up, that's when I'm going to get back to this and back to that. And God interrupted me and said, you're going to get back to acting, comedy, music, everything you did before the accident. You're going to do it in the chair and better.
Partnerships.
Nothing that you've talked about that I've done did I do on my own. Not one thing. I had to lean on other people to help birth the baby that was in me. Partnerships. The industry is a business of partnerships. I'm working on my first Hollywood script right now. And the only reason why I'm doing that is because of the people that I've met over the past couple of years. I prayed and I asked the Lord, David, I said, Lord, as I get into film, because remember, I'm transitioning from stage to film. I said, as I get into film, don't just give me the knowledge, give me the people that will show me and that will train me in the areas that I did not go to school for. Give me people that will become mentors. And God did just that. And because of those partnerships, it's allowing me to be in positions that I just never would have been on my own. You need people to do what you're called to do. That's just the bottom line. You need people. And the more you understand that, the more you press into that, the more you receive that, not only will God send people, but he'll send the right people.
So for the listener who is out there, understand that your journey from paralysis to purpose requires these three things. You got to see right, you got to work, and you got to have some help. You don't have to make this journey by yourself. God never designed humankind to do it by themselves. Nothing exists in life without partnerships. If people want to follow you, what's the best way for them to do that on social media?
Facebook, Vincent Rutley. Instagram, Vincent Rutley. YouTube, Vincent Rutley. I read every comment. I respond to every message. So you follow me on those platforms and you reach out, I'll reach you back.
Make sure we do that. Again, thanks a lot for your time. And until next time on Paralysis to Purpose, the podcast, this is your host, David Cooks, reminding you that your ability to endure is always greater than your willingness to endure.
You can do anything you put your mind to.
Thanks for tuning in to Paralysis to Purpose. Don't forget to follow us on social media at Paralysis to Purpose on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. To purchase his book, visit davidcookspeaks.com. Be sure to tune in next time for more inspiring conversations with David Cooks.
The midwife came over and examined her and said, I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do. And in this village, just like most of the villages there were no doctors, there was no hospitals, no medical facilities. And the midwife basically told the woman, there's no heartbeat, the baby is not alive, and you're not going to make it.
Next time on Paralysis to Purpose.
And her husband was right next to her, and he just fell to his knees and started crying. And I'm looking into the eyes of this woman who was just told she's not going to live another few hours. And I started to have one of those panic attacks where, again, your heart's pounding, your chest feels tight, you're having trouble catching your breath, and tears were coming down my face. And so my dad looked over at me and saw me like that. He picked me up, he held me, he carried me out of there, he calmed me down. On the drive home, I said, "Dad, I don't want to feel like that ever again." And he asked me the greatest question of all time. He said, "What are you going to do about it?" I thought about it and I said, "I guess I'll be a surgeon. I'll be the best surgeon in the whole world. And I'll carry my medical bag with me everywhere I go, and I'll save lives."
Paralysis to purpose.